In the 90s, people were quick to label bands from the Seattle area grunge, but few bands that made it to the mainstream actually were. Alice in Chains is a prime example. They were a hard rock band with an enigmatic and charismatic frontman named Layne Staley. Layne Rutherford Staley, born August 22, 1967 in Bellevue, Washington. He cut his teeth on the godfathers of metal, bands like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. He hated his middle name so badly that in his teens, he legally changed it to Thomas in honor of Motley Crue's Tommy Lee. At the age of 12, Staley began to play drums and would play in several glam rock bands, but his first real attempt was a band called Sleaze. That band would turn into Alice in Chains with the letter N. The band would not be Alice in Chains until Layne met guitarist Jerry Cantrell at a party. He had seen Layne's band and was impressed. Cantrell was recently homeless, so Layne invited him to stay with him in his rehearsal space/home. Believe it or not, Alice in Chains would disband, and Staley would start a funk band and had Jerry join as a sideman. The band would feature members that would eventually become the Alice in Chains we know today. After the funk fizzled, the band would try new names like the actual F Word and Diamond Live, but they would eventually settle on the name Alice in Chains after clearing it with the former members of the band. A local promoter was really blown away by Alice in Chains and offered to pay for a demo, but fate stepped in, and the day before the band was set to record, police raided the studio to take one of the biggest marijuana raids in the history of the state of Washington. They did eventually make a demo called the Treehouse Tapes in 1988, and on the strength of that, they got a deal with Columbia Records. Their major label debut was an album called Facelift. But the band's breakthrough album came 2 years later with Dirt in 1992. The band was struggling with addiction, particularly Layne Staley. It became such a problem that they had to cut the tour short. But they kept recording, and in 1994, the EP Jar of Flies was released, and it became a #1, which was the first time that an EP had ever reached #1. Staley entered rehab, and he would also work on new music, including an album with Mike McCready of Pearl Jam, originally called The Gacy Bunch, but was finally renamed Mad Season and became a classic. Layne would also team up with Ann Wilson for a cover of Bob Dylan's Ring Them Bells, featured on Heart's 1993 album Desire Walks On, and he was in the supergroup Class of '99 for the movie The Faculty, where they covered The Wall by Pink Floyd. Layne Staley would struggle with addiction and would eventually succumb to the torture of his demons and lose his battle and his life on April 5th, 2002. He was only 34. His music lives on, his legacy unmarred, and it reminds us that pain and joy aren't mutually exclusive. Layne Staley will always be remembered as a grunge legend, but we all know he is so much more than that. And this is his classic rock resume.